Now that we have completed our player movement, let's move on to jumping. Now the first thing we're going to do is we are going to come over to our player and make sure that the freeze rotation boxes are all checked and that the freeze position in the X is unchecked. The first thing we are going to do is we are going to take this floor and go ahead and duplicate this object. We're going to come into our scene and we're going to set the transform to 1, and we'll just set the Z to, well, we'll set the X to about 10. Now looking at our game view, if we hit play, we could walk over to the wall, but we cannot go through it and we cannot go over it because our character cannot jump. So to do this, we're going to add another part to our player move script. So let's come over to Visual Studios. Now the first thing I want to do is not necessary, but it is good for organization. I'm going to create a non-returning void function called move. There we go. And what I'm going to do is take everything that we have inside of update, copy it, and paste it inside of move. I'm going to come up here in my update function, delete that, and just write move. This is good for organization because now it has taken all of these lines of code outside of my update function and has replaced it with a move function that does the same exact thing. So now we have more space to work on our jump function. The first thing we are going to need in our jump function is an if statement, similar to these ones, because we need to get our jump key set. So we're going to say if input dot get key space, oops, don't forget your quotation marks, do this, whatever we put in here. In this jump function, I'm going to use a Unity function called add force. And to be able to use this function, I'm going to need a reference to the game object's rigidbody, which is, if you come into Unity and come onto the player, this right here. So to do that, I'm going to create a private rigidbody, and we're just going to call it rigid body. So now we have a reference to some sort of rigid body, but now we need to go ahead and set it. And to set it, we're going to make a start function, and this will happen when our game starts up, and we're going to say rigid body is equal to get component rigid body. This will get our rigid body component off our player object and set a reference to it in our script. So now let's come over back to our update function in our if statement. And we're going to call a function that inherits from the rigid body class. And to do this, we're going to write rigid body, which is our reference to our player rigid body, dot add force, and we're going to say Pt.3 dot up. Now we have our rigid body and we have added a force to it in the up direction. Right now the force is just 1, but we might want to increase that later, so we're going to create a variable to help us change the force on our object. So let's go over to our ints and we're just going to say, make a comma and say jump force. And right now we're just going to set it to 100. Now that we've added our variable, we can come over to our if statement and we're just going to multiply up. Since up is equal to 1, we could just multiply this by our jump force. And now we are adding a force equal to the jump force variable. Now let's go over to Unity and see if what we have is working. So if we hit play and we hit spacebar, you notice we jump and it looks like we're jumping super high at the moment. So let's come over to our jump force variable and let's just turn that down to 30 for right now. And come back to our game. Tap spacebar again. You notice I don't jump as high. But you could also notice that if I hold down jump, that I could jump indefinitely. Because right now our if statement is checking if I have the spacebar down. And if I have the spacebar down, I'm going to be indefinitely adding this jump force to my player. We not only have to check if the spacebar is pressed, but we also have to check if our player is touching the ground, because we only want our player to be able to jump once. We don't want our player to be able to jump infinitely. So if the player is on the ground, we should allow them to be able to jump once. And to do that, we're going to use something called raycasting. And what raycasting does is it shoots a laser in a direction until it hits an object. Now, it may sound kind of scary at first, but it is actually pretty easy to use. So let's go ahead and open up our player move script. So the first thing we're going to need is some sort of way to check if the player is grounded. And to do that, we're just going to make a public bool, and we're just going to call it is grounded. Now that we have our bool, we're going to come over here to our function, and we're going to need an if and else statement. So if and else. So in here, we are not only going to check if spacebar is pressed, but we also want to check if is grounded is true. Now let's move on to our if statement. This is where we are going to start using raycasting. I'm going to first start by creating an object called raycast hit, and we're just going to call it hit. Raycast hit is a variable, and it pretty much returns whatever our raycast is going to hit. So now let's come over here. We're going to type in physics dot raycast. We're going to come over here and we're going to put some info in here. So the first thing we need is our Pt.3 origin, which is pretty much where our raycast is shooting from. And we're going to want to shoot it from the player. So we're going to want to shoot it from our transform dot position. So this is the first thing we need, is our origin. Now we're going to need our direction. And the direction we are going to need is down, because we want to check how far away our player is from the ground. So we're going to type transform dot transform direction, and then we're going to say Pt.3 dot down. Now we need to add an output, so we're going to say out, and we're going to say hit, because we want our raycast to output into our hit variable. So now that we have our out hit, we're going to add one more thing here, and that is just mathf dot infinity. This right here is our variable that tells us how far we want our laser to shoot. Math.infinity pretty much just says we want our laser to shoot indefinitely as far as it could shoot. So now that we have that, let's come over here and say debug dot log, and we'll say hit dot distance, and we'll save that, and we'll go ahead and comment out our if statement for right now. So when I hit play here, our object falls here to the ground, and as you can see, we are printing out this 1 in the console. This is the hit distance of our raycast object. So it is shooting a ray from our transform.position of our player object down to this collider right here, and it's saying that distance is 1. So if we come in here and come back to our if statement and uncomment it out, we could write if hit dot distance is less than or equal to 1.0f, we're going to say is grounded equals to true. Else, we're just going to go ahead and say is grounded is equal to false. Now, as you can see, our jumping works, but as you can see, it's jumping really strangely. Every once in a while, it'll jump like a little higher, and it's not getting that far off the ground. And there's a couple things we could do to fix this. The first thing we want to do is come over to our update function, and instead of having it to be just our classic update function, we want to change it to fix update. It's very important to use fixed update when it comes to physics objects, because update could run many times per frame, or it could run 0 times per frame, but fixed update, on the other hand, will always run once per frame. So it's a little more reliable than update when it comes to physics. The second thing I'm going to do to make this operate a little smoother is I'm going to come over to hit distance right here and change this, instead of a 1, change it to 1.15. And the reason I'm doing this is because this force is only going to be added for a very minuscule amount of time if this is only 1. And the reason that is because our hit distance is only 1 at a single spot in our whole game, and that is only when this is touching the ground. So as soon as it's off the ground, this is going to return false, and we're not going to be able to add our jump force anymore. This will allow us to jump a little bit higher than we are already in the game. So let's go ahead and save this and give it a test. Now we can move back and forth, and our jump operates much better than it did before. And we can't double jump, we can't jump infinitely, and our game is set. But there's one other thing I'm going to add here to hopefully make this a little bit more understandable. What I'm going to do first is go ahead and bring my scene and my game mode next to each other in the Unity window. I'm going to come back over here, and I'm going to write something under our physics.raycast. I'm going to write debug.drawRay. I'm going to come over here to draw ray, and pretty much it is very similar to this right here. So I'm going to copy paste this, and then instead of just our Pt.3 down right here, I'm going to multiply this by our hit.distance, and then at the end we're going to want to add a color here, and we're going to just make it red so it's readable. I'm going to go ahead and save this. And what this does is it's going to draw a line of our raycast. It's going to make our invisible laser now visible to us in our scene mode. So let's go ahead and go back over to our game. Now we hit play. Here we are, and you can see, look at our ray right here. It's drawing. It's kind of hard to see because it's kind of small. So let's go ahead and just make this a little bigger. Click Click on that. You can see we're moving, and when I hit spacebar, you could see our invisible laser shooting out at the ground, and you can see how we are detecting how far away we are from the ground. Now that we have that all set up, we have our 2D player controller for our platformer.